my boss at the time, Mohammed Lalu, he was just one of the best salespeople I've ever met in my life, and he owned a big chain of repair shops, computer repair shops up in Seattle. Uh, he just was like, why would I do this? Like, how is this going to make me money? So he went back to first principles, back to the rules. How is this going to make me money? Right? The opposite of how this is going to make me money is how is this going to lose me money?
Okay, so Wooga Booga, everybody. This is Konrad, Yerba Addict with
Nate, right.
right.
How's that?
In today's week's episode of Voodoo Influence, and today we're gonna start with the quote from none other than Rory Sutherland: "The opposite of a good idea can be another good idea." And basically, we're gonna talk about the rationality and practicality, that what's practical does not necessarily have to be rational. Differences between like PR, influencer marketing, and what we are talking about here. Why do we have this obsession with voodoo? What are some channels and platforms you should be ignoring? And in general, like what are some strategies to get to the top, and why they are often not rational, but they should be practical.
The problem is that I see when people are marketing their businesses or trying to grow their own influence through networking and PR is this tendency to keep playing the same three power chords like a punk rock song.
Why do you think this is such a great quote? Like that the opposite of a good idea can be another good idea, and what does it represent in like the business world? Like what does it mean for the people watching that are, let's say, business experts?
I mean the quote is the whole book's amazing. It's this book, Alchemy, by Rory Sutherland. It was introduced to me by one of our old business partners over at Sales Schema. He's actually the host of the Agency Growth podcast, Dan Englander. He just sent me like a one-line text with a link to it. He said, "Read this fucking book," and so I grabbed it on Audible and I just burned through it. I think I've been through it 3 times now. It's and I think that the reason it should be almost treated as a commandment for business owners and people in business in general is it's a good way to check yourself when you start assuming that we're just riffing off of best practices, right? And there are certain things, there are certain rules. If you look at, we'll take music for example, right? And that's where my business started back in 09. I started repping musicians up in Seattle, and I was okay at it. Learned a lot, but I also got a chance to work with a lot of great musicians, and most of them either were self-taught or had training in jazz. And jazz is full of rules, things that are rules, but it also is just a foundation for developing something unique. So that when folks are in a band and they both have that common language, they could riff off of each other. And the problem is that I see when people are marketing their businesses or trying to grow their own influence through networking and PR is this tendency to keep playing the same 3 power chords like a punk rock song, when you've got so many different kinds of music. You still have only a certain amount of notes, sharps, flats, and majors, and you've got scales. There's still a certain framework things that you can't break, the rules. You need someone to open up their wallet to make money. Like there's some basic fundamental pieces there, but folks tend to just do remakes of the same thing. And that Rory Southern quote for me is that sometimes the opposite of a good idea is another good idea. Sometimes the opposite of a great idea is another great idea. It could be flipped around a few different ways. Is that it forces me to get out of that mindset. Like, what would be the opposite? I think that's why, like, in mathematics, and like Charlie Munger is big about inversion. Inversion technically isn't what we're talking about here, but it is another way to force you to think about a situation or a problem differently. To force yourself out of your own head and away from the top 40 station on Spotify. And that's where the dangerous thing is. That's where the rational thing that the marketing gods have spoken, that having a Facebook company page and fishing around for likes, then when the ad platform came out in Facebook, paying for likes would actually create the type of attention that would generate wealth.
Logic is our superstition. That basically we've become this like kind of like when we believe superstitions, like other people do some like witch stuff and we call it, okay, this is like stupid
Mm-hmm.
superstition. But I think in certain cases now, like that in business, that logic seems to be the superstition. That like like everything that's logical is practical. And if something's not logical, like rational, then it just doesn't make sense. I cannot do it, or I cannot like then convince my boss that it's a good idea. Like like there is something has to be like
Yeah.
measured, logical, and it cannot be like too far out.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think of a few big examples of that is the funnel. People talk about the sales funnel, the marketing funnel. They apply funnels to everything. There's click funnels. There's funnelytics. There's this whole like universe and like ecosystem of funnels. And years ago, I forgot who it was. It may have been Anthony Honorino on the sales blog, or someone else that talked about what would it look like if we flipped the funnel, actually invert the funnel. Like, what would that look like? And it was a very interesting kind of thought exercise about, how to create an environment where up was down and down was up. Uh, which would actually, that would give you pretty great competitive advantage, right? Like something like one of those movies where, gravity, that doesn't really work the same way. It was it was an interesting thought exercise. I wish I could figure out. I will have to dig out the link out of the Evernote library, but it really, like reading that article this was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago that I read this, uh, when I was still focused on best practices and the playbook, whatever the flavor of the month was.
Mm.
And a good example of that actually would be Facebook and Facebook likes. So when Facebook first came out, like the like button was like it was baked into very early versions of it. And when Facebook company pages came out, I was one of those people that all of my clients, like all three of my clients, it was a very long time ago, or I was like, hey, you need to get a Facebook page. We need to optimize it. Like, this is what we need to do to help get your business exposure. And it doesn't cost anything. And then, the measure of success was likes. And my boss at the time, Mohammed Lalu, he was just one of the best salespeople I've ever met in my life, and you owned a big chain of repair shops, computer repair shops up in Seattle. Uh, he just was like, "Why would I do this? Like, how is this going to make me money?" So he went back to first principles, back to the rules. How is this going to make me money? Right. The opposite of how this is going to make me money is how is this going to lose me money? Like, what could I do to help lose money? Which is an example of inversion, right? But if you and it was a great question, and I was like, oh, this is what we need to do right now, and that's where the dangerous thing is. That's where the rational thing that the marketing gods have spoken, that having a Facebook company page and fishing around for likes, then when the ad platform came out in Facebook, paying for likes would actually create the type of attention that would generate wealth and money and, and
Mm.
popularity. Influencer marketing is definitely something that, it generates attention, but does it generate the right kind of attention? Does the attention last? Is it sticky?
What are the three main power cards that everyone's playing right now, then, and that we should probably be people should be ignoring? I mean, like probably one of them is influencer marketing, right? Like if we and there's this quote that I prepared, which is like that. Unfortunately, what we call influencer marketing doesn't actually build trust because influencers command attention, not intention. Just I
Who,
think
who, who did that? Said that again?
it's from those studies. I will find it and put in the notes, but I can't.
Yeah, no, that is it's a really really good way of looking at it. Yeah, I think influencer marketing is one. Frankly, I think the this idea of an evergreen funnel is one as well. I mean, I've
Mm,
seen case studies. Hey, I ran this campaign, I built this funnel, I optimized this funnel using whatever marketing celebrity or startup celebrity recommended it, and I was able to get go from a 0.5% to a 12% conversion rate, and I made $10,000 in 10 days, and blah blah blah, right? And those things are real. Like I've had a chance to work with people that like live and work in that space, and they did make that money.
mm,
Now that's cool. That's not an evergreen funnel though, because they expect that if it was an evergreen funnel and a well built funnel, by definition, it would, if I shovel more into it, I should get more out. So if I go from pushing 1,000 prospects into the top of the funnel, it should poop out $10 every day or $100 every day. Uh, and also, if it works in July of 2021, it should work in December of 2021. And sometimes that's true, but it rarely is. And
mm,
year over year, I mean, there's people that have hit that mark, but it is rare. Like so many conditions have to be just right for it to do that, that you just don't have control over. That's relying on market conditions and other people's feelings. So I would say the evergreen funnel, influencer marketing, is definitely something that it generates attention, but does it generate the right kind of attention? Does the attention last? Is it sticky? Like you and I, have participated a lot, hosting and guesting and brokering and building from scratch podcasts. And podcasts, I don't think they're going away anytime soon. But the podcast host as an influencer, maybe they're not an influencer as much as we think, you know?
mm.
And in some cases, I got approached this week by someone that wanted me to be a guest on their podcast, and I used to love it. It's, oh my goodness, I would have all these emotions, right? You're like, oh my goodness, this person reached out to me out of a sea of people and thought that I'm the right person for their show. Like all this really just like middle school, like little kid type ego stuff going through my head. This time I was like, nope. It's like, no, thank you. Uh, because the host was trying to curry favor with influencers to become an influencer. He wasn't an influencer trying to showcase new ideas.
Mm,
Like the two things there.
okay. And what would you say the third one would be like? I'm thinking as far as buzzwords, if we are going after what's trendy,
Yeah.
then now there's this whole, I think, wave of like thought leaders.
I mean, I would
Um,
say I would actually add four. I would say thought leadership is a big one, and omni-channel is
I like
another one.
omni-channel marketing.
Yeah, for thought leadership, I think it's a buzzword. I think in the B2B space, though, gone by many names over the years. Like it's almost like a mythology surrounding it right now, but it's been around forever. It's like you are generating new ideas or a fresh perspective on old ideas adapted to current conditions, and you need to broadcast it some way to let people know that I've got this new idea and or a fresh perspective on an old idea, and you're leading with these new thoughts, right? So that's been around like since before the written word. Like there's nothing that's not a new thing. It being baked into people's strategies is new, and I actually think that's a good thing. I
Hmm.
think thought leadership. I hate that phrase, but that is part of the space I live in, and I must embrace it. Embrace the buzz. Uh, it is something that I participate in and I've helped people with, but it doesn't always work. I've spent lots of money and lots of time on my own stuff, and just didn't. No one read it, or a lot of people read it. No one gave a shit. They didn't care enough about what I wrote. It wasn't unique enough. Wasn't timed right, or wasn't broadcast to the right audience, or you know didn't have staying power, because people talk a lot about like, "Ooh, don't read my blog post from like 2013." Like those things are way out of date. And I think that the true thought leaders these days are the ones that are actually
Thinking.
doing something substantial, or doing things that like could survive more than a month. Like they have a longer shelf life. I don't think it's possible to have a forever shelf life, but that's the wonderful thing about the digital age is you can go back and edit it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And then the omni-channel piece, I think omni-channel would be the third one. That would be the third power chord. It's that's just the way it's always been, right? Like in the B2B space, like for people's like they think that, you know, my 15 touch sales process, email and voicemail and call and oh, let's add SMS in there too. And, then they get remarketed to you on 3 different platforms and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, man, yeah, I think you need to do all those things. But the, the danger again with that is that it's something that will continue lasting, that, I mean, the channels, assuming all of the different channels stayed the same, our influence channels, which is like podcasting and webinars and long form articles like LinkedIn articles, Medium articles, right? And you've got your pay per click with Facebook and Google and now Reddit and Twitter and LinkedIn ads, display ads, native ads, and email ads, blah blah blah, right? And you've got your space of like inbound, SEO, backlinking strategies, all these different things. Assuming none of those changed, that they were all constants in the equation, the big variable is still human behavior. And that's something I think Rory Sutherland understands. I think he is a true thought leader because the way he thinks about human behavior and how human behavior at a mass scale, how it shifts and changes. Charlie Munger also, uh, looking hunt. He has a really complex series of mental models that he uses to try to find black swans, which is basically looking to see what that next shift in human behavior is going to be. And so, but omnichannel marketing, you're assuming all those channels are going to say the same, and that human behavior is going to be the same or predictable.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's why forcing ourselves out of the same three power chords is really important. It's really,
Mm.
really important. Uh, some of the best practices actually do an okay job of addressing certain biases and certain strange things. But when you're dealing with something like influence, you know, at its core, that core principle is trust.
In the previous episodes, you're talking about, like
Creating unfair
maybe
advantages, the danger of a fair fight.
yeah,
Yeah.
danger of the fair fight, and
No.
and even there is I love this quote. I think it's also like Bill Bernbach. I think it's the guy who created the ad for the Volkswagen, the Beetle, Volkswagen,
Yeah,
the
Dale
famous one.
Lehman Byrne at DDB, the like one of the original madmen. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So he said creativity might be the last unfair advantage we are allowed to have. So I think it's
Yeah.
you are basically touching on the point that if that I think all of these things have in common that they're like the best practices. Everyone's talking about they're logical. There is maybe like easy way to measure them, and because of that, all of that, they're also very like they lead you to the same place everyone else is going, and that's why they're not as effective as maybe some other ways that are like way
Yeah.
more irrational. And that I also count on the fact, which I think is also a point we should touch on briefly, is this. We started on that before the call that we mistakenly believe that human behavior is rational and very predictable,
Yeah.
and it's like this economics approach to to human life, which just doesn't. I think it doesn't really hold true, right?
Yeah. I mean, biases are a really big thing right now. There's whole books and series of books and bodies of work, like Daniel Kahneman and, with all of the behavioral economics.
Yeah,
And
no.
you've got, The Art of Thinking Clearly. Fantastic book, by the way. That's what kind of introduced me to all of the different cognitive biases. Uh, but you're seeing it everywhere now. Evolutionary psychology, Robert Wright's, opinion on evolutionary psychology, and the so it's no longer a new idea, right? It's the science. People are introducing the science. The assumption that's made though is that because a lot of these best practices were crafted understanding that humans are irrational. That was the you know
Irrational or rational?
irrational
Okay.
irrational. Some of these modern best practices, like omni-channel marketing at its core, is an effort to probe a human mind in different ways, with exposure and different channels, different multi-sensory, different ways of making it sticky. Because a multi-sensory experience is going to be remembered more than if just
Hmm.
a single sense, right? So that's something that is based in science. It's based in the rules, right? Uh, the challenge, though, and the danger really is assuming that I want we'll use an influence category. So I had someone reach out to me this week who's in the kind of the IT consulting slash strategy space, and they want to use influencer marketing to make money. That's okay, and that's good, right? I'm glad they're coming to me to ask that question, and maybe I'll be able to turn it into an engagement and help them make some money. That'd be great. And you look at that and say, okay, they have some level of locality. So let's just say Seattle. And they say they're a localized business in Seattle. So we need to influence owners of mid-sized manufacturing companies so that they will buy our consulting. That's the exercise.
Okay.
So you can look at that and say, okay, well, I'm not going to assume that they're going to buy it because it's going to help their business. Let's just cast that aside. That's the rational thing. No, oh, I need this to help my business. I need to something that serves my needs. I need someone to address my needs, my IT needs. Where are you, consultant? I've been looking all over the world for you. I finally found somebody who serves that need. That okay? No. I mean, if you, yeah, you may stumble across that, but that is going to be luck, right?
Or rare.
So that's the first thing you cast aside. But then you start looking at okay, how do I've got my group of people identified and say that I've got a list of well, Seattle's a big market, so I have a list of like 50,000 presidents and vice presidents of mid-size light industrial companies in the greater Seattle area. So how do I influence them? So okay, we could look at that and we could start pulling best practices off the shelf. And some of the best practices actually do an okay job of addressing certain biases and certain strange things. But when you're dealing with something like influence, you know, at its core, that core principle is trust. So, example, why do I trust Konrad? How did I forge that trust relationship with Konrad?
It's like I think a mix
And
of
like,
like frequency and quality of our interactions, right? Like
well, yeah, that's part of it, and that's why omni-channels built, right? You're creating a lot of different types and flavors of interaction with the thought, but in the world of influence, the level of trust has to be really high that you'll just take that person's word as gospel and just do it. So who influences when you start looking and thinking about this? Who influences that group of people, and how could we leverage their influence to drive business opportunity through our door? So if you're looking at trust, I don't trust you for rational reasons at all. I was initially, when you first reached out to me out of the blue years ago, I was like, who is this kid? And is that goatee painted on or is that real? I was sporting a much larger beard at the time, a much beardier beard. Is that a thing?
yeah,
Uh,
beauty, beauty.
yeah, it was a bit more like craft brewer status. Yeah, I make craft kombucha. Anyways, so there wasn't anything clearly identifiable. It was just like, oh, that's different. And I could look back and I don't even remember what it was. It wasn't the Yerba thing. That was cool, interesting. The logo was cool, but like that's a really fucking dumb reason to trust somebody. But
Yeah,
that's that framework is like, oh man, he's kind of weird like me. So people are going to be like, oh wow, this person is middle aged and has two kids and two and a half cars and a car loan, and you know they're interested in they read Forbes. Oh, you're just like me. They connect for really weird reasons. It's the weird stuff that they connect on, and that's where we connected. And then, as you said, through a volume of high frequency of interactions, where there was a lot of transactions, verbal agreements, appointments, showing up to appointments. We have appointments, right? Uh, and that build up and reinforce that trust. But when you start thinking about influence and trust, how they're like really baked into each other, if I assumed that I was going to be able to find 10 more Konrads. If that was the exercise, and then Konrad was the guy that influences these, presidents of mid-sized marketing and light industrial companies in the greater Seattle area. How would I find 10 more of those? Uh, they're not going to be found there. I mean, they're going to be found at the bar. Do I need to write a campaign and find out where all these people drink?
Yeah, you
Do
could ask like
they-
who do they already trust, right? And
Yeah,
then
but it may not be in business. Maybe they trust their
yeah,
pastor.
they trust their what?
Their pastor of their church.
Pastor.
Maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's the common thread. How would I do that? So that's the thing. Is like opposite of a good idea. It might be another good idea. Opposite good idea is like instead of business people, let's do non-business people. So when you start running through that, there actually might be a good idea buried in there. That's why that Rory Sutherland quote really resonates so much with me, because people will say, "Well, you can't do that." Well, really? Can't you? So we're gonna do, and morally it brings up all sorts of weirdness too, that you're gonna like use the church institution to help grow your business.
Mm.
It'd be an interesting thought exercise. How would I leverage, morally aligned population of people and the mega churches of the west coast of the United States, and there's some big ones. It's billions of dollars, right? Hundreds of millions of people and billions of dollars flowing through those places. And I'm a byproduct of that. I'm a byproduct of the mega church growing up. And but if I wanted to use that to grow my influence and expose me to new business opportunities, how would I do that? This is actually a great example of like how to leverage the irrationality piece, the non-logical piece. Well, maybe just swap out or with and. Problem solved. Just have both.
Is trust the reason why, for example, like a single, video interview can, seen by, let's say, like 100 people, can yield you more like business and money than, let's say, buying a somewhere like a PR placement in like a Bloomberg or something? Is that
I think
because
you need.
like,
I think it's an and, not an or situation.
what do you mean?
Uh,
And then not an or?
that's a mental model from the book Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. I've reread that book probably 30 times. I'm huge fans of theirs. And one of the decision making mental models they talk about is that when you're looking at options, you have a problem or an opportunity that you want to pursue, and you're looking at option A and B, there's different mental models you could go through. And one of the ways to break out of your own head, and this is actually a great example of like how to leverage the irrationality piece, the non-logical piece. Well, maybe just swap out or with and. Problem solved. Just have both. Why can't you have both? And what that does, though, is even though it may not be possible to have both, thinking about how you could have both forces you out of your own like best practice, comfortable, setting your own biases perspective to look at the problem differently. So, in the case of, trust, and kind of that arena, that's something that, I mean, I think it's both. Concept of confident exclusion. By confidently excluding the masses, the 80%, the remaining 20% will feel even more welcome and feel like they belong even more.
If best practices are not the best approach, if what's trending is not the best approach, and we, for example, recently discovered that, for example, like that podcasts are no longer that good. They're still good, but they are becoming crowded. then
Mm-hmm.
like how do you find those new better ways, like that those creative new better ways, because it's not
Well, so
obvious.
yeah, so to go back to the original question about paying for PR versus the free, quote unquote free world of like getting booked on podcasts. So I do think that you need both. I do think that there are people that specialize in how to, teaching folks how to get their own PR, and some of them are quite good. I think paying for it would actually be easier, take a lot less time because PR is again built on black books. It's a very strategy focused approach too when it's done right. But I think you need both because they're different things. PR gives you status, and sometimes the shelf life of that status could be quite long. If I was featured in a New York Times article in 2007, that would still be valid today
Mm,
because I was featured in the goddamn New York Times, right? It's like the big daddy in the U.S. as far as press placements go. The But the podcast piece, when you talked about thought leadership before, that's not a best practice. That's just you know being the person that evangelizes an existing idea in a new way that's useful or different or controversial. It's one of the things that I think that Seth Godin that he really digs into that this concept of controversy
mm,
when he's helping people market and grow businesses. It's like, if you have the opportunity to make something controversial, you take it. Uh, there's a whole bunch of different reasons for that too. Again, that's an excellent example of an irrational approach. Why would I want to ruffle people's feathers? Why would I want to intentionally scare people away from
yeah.
me, my ideas, my brand, my business? Derek Sivers talks a lot about that in Anything You Want, that this concept of confident exclusion.
Mm,
That by confidently excluding the masses, the 80%, the remaining 20% will feel even more welcome and feel like they belong even more because they don't want to be associated with those other people. And
mm,
so that's another one of those ideas that, and it's not reverse psychology. I think that is a massively overused term. So I think you need both. But again, if we're gonna let's practice what we preach, right? So I want to build my level of influence in the business space. Let's say that's the exercise, right? And let's use the Seattle case study. There are excellent PR firms up there, so I could get uh, interviewed in like you know the Puget Sound Business Journal. Okay, that's something that's doable. Probably wouldn't be that expensive to curry some favors. You might even be able to do it for free by showing up to the right events. You know, and sending them a press release. Pitching one of their journalists. Maybe you get lucky and get something in the Seattle Times. Maybe you do something strange and get picked up in the Stranger, one of their more edgy magazines. So we could do that, right? And now, wait, this I've seen this person in a few different publications. They're a bigger deal. This IT consultant is a bigger deal than I thought. Okay, there's that status, right? They're not a player, now they're a player. The podcast piece would give them a chance to flex their muscles publicly and show in a live environment that they know their shit. So what types of people can interview them where they get a chance to kind of flex their muscles and kind of show them. But what would be the third thing? Why would we just stick with two? So what would be the opposite of the idea? What's the opposite of PR? What's the opposite of a podcast interview with a business person?
Mm.
So it kind of forces you to start thinking about it. I frankly haven't thought about that at all. I mean, I think about odd targets, like what's a weird podcast that we could get on. It'd be interesting to have him, talk to, like, there's a bunch of colleges up in Seattle. Maybe he should schedule some conversations with professors. Go back to the source.
Mm.
Something totally anti-business. Like there's nothing more opposite of like CEO than a professor. So, you know, even though a lot of my clients right now actually have partnered with thought leaders inside academia. We got a couple now, and it's definitely kept me on my toes. Those dudes are smart. It's not just the letters behind their name; they're legit smart, like way smarter than me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, no, these are. I think from me, I would add two things that came to my mind. Is that one way you can look at it? I think is the like 80-20 principle. That maybe invest 80% of your efforts or money or whatever time into the more obvious, like kind of things that are easier to
Mm-hmm.
kind of come up with and execute, and then like have a 20% budget to play around with the weird kind of intangible stuff, the non-rational,
Yep.
so that you can and hopefully the 20% you can accept that it might be lost forever. That's the best, I guess, because it might work, it
Yep.
might not. And I think the other mental model to look at this through is like your like where is your advantage, like where is your unique ability, like are you a good public speaker, are you a better writer, are you a better like where is your like environment, or where do you have connections, existing connections, like where can you have like an initial boost of like advantage, be it expertise or or just innate ability. Because for example, if you already know a lot like how to execute Facebook ads, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't know anything about for example
Oh
PR, then maybe it's better
no,
if you just start with what you already
no,
know, because that's
uh,
yeah.
yeah, no, that topic right there is worth its own conversation. That's packed. That
Okay.
idea of competence is something you and I have talked a lot about before, and I think that the like when deciding which weird idea you're going to tackle, that's part of the checklist. Because looking at your own level of competence to be able to even determine, like, because sometimes the opposite of a good idea is just a fucking awful idea.